Hi, everyone. I am very, very happy to have Michael Martin with me today, who is the director of the Center of Sophiological Studies in Waterloo, Michigan. Is that right?
Well, Waterloo Township, Grass Lake, Michigan, yeah.
Grass Lake, Michigan. Michael is the author of this book, The Submerged Reality, Sophiology, and the Turn to a Poetic Metaphysics. And I think as will come out in the conversation, I think this is a really important book, especially for Christians of all stripes. And I think we can get into this. So maybe before we start, just a little bit about Michael Martin and how you came to write this book.
Okay, sure. Well, it was a long process, actually. I mean, first heard about Sophiology, oh gosh, probably more than 30 years ago. I was working in a bookstore, and I think I was talking about the rosary to a customer, and he said, "You must know about Vladimir Soloviev," and I didn't know anything about Soloviev. So I found a book on Soloviev and read it. And I read as much as I could, and so I wasn't, and at that time I was not a professional scholar or anything. I was a musician, actually, and but it's, it stays with you, and you encounter things as you go along your path, and you find more things that are like that. But then what happened? Kind of fast forward to about 15, 16 years later, I was working on a PhD in English. And I'd always kind of had this kind of side interest in sociology, but never really had time to really explore it in depth. And then what happened, I was working on my dissertation, which was later published as the book, Literature and the Encounter with God in Post-Reformation England. And in that book, there are chapters. There's a chapter on John Dee, a chapter on John Donne, a chapter on Sir Kenelm Digby, if you know about him, who was an alchemist and kind of swashbuckler. And the last two chapters were on Henry and Thomas Vaughn and Jane Lead from the Philadelphian Society. And as I was doing the last two chapters, and it was later in the 17th century where those figures showed up, and their spiritual attitudes, their mysticism changed was changed quite a bit from what you saw earlier in the 17th century in England. And what changed that was the introduction of the works of Jacob Boehme into English. They were first published in 1648. And I realized at the time that it kind of set off a sophiological atom bomb or something in 17th century England, because it kind of reset Christian mysticism from that place forward. And I realized that no one had ever really done a study of that. And I said, and I think I don't think it's in the final book, but I think it's in my dissertation. I put a footnote and said, somebody should write a book about this. Being me. In fact, the original intention for the submerged reality was to focus more on the 17th century. But as I got into the projects, I said, this is a much bigger thing than just the 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of opened it up that way, and what I found through, I guess, those two books was I finally had a name for my own spirituality. Because in fact, our farm, I'm a biodynamic farmer. Our farm is named Stella Matutina, which is the morning star, which is actually one of the titles of the Virgin Mary. And so my wife and I, our relationships almost was cemented. We've almost been married 30 years by praying the rosary together all these years ago. And so that kind of Marian sociological spirituality has kind of always been there. But what I got from the Philadelphians and from Henry and Thomas Vaughn was actually I found my clan, you know what I mean? I found my tribe, and I found that they were actually articulating a spirituality that I had been practicing but didn't have a word for. And what that spirituality is, it's and as I write in the book with the introduction of natura pura, or pure nature philosophy, in the 16th century was devastating for religious culture, for Christian culture, and a lot of people don't even know about it, because pure nature argues that there could be, and probably are, places in the world or in human beings or where God's grace is absent. The presence of God, it's not possible, right? And the sophiologists going from Burma all the way to today, to Thomas Merton, argue that that's not at all the case. That's not reality. And so that the reality then has to do with the human being in not only relationship with other human beings, but with nature, which to be in relationship with nature is to be in relationship with the supernatural. Yes. In fact, there is no supernatural. There are just different gradations of nature. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's kind of a hyper Aristotelian model that absorbs Platonism as well.
So your acquaintance with these English figures, I mean, you have the early introduction to Soloviev, and then you go here. Is that all prior to meeting Anthroposophy and reading deeper into the Russians? Or was this all happening kind of at once?
Well, yeah, it kind of all happened at the same time. So in fact, the guy who told me about Soloviev he was a kind of anthroposophist. I don't know how tightly with the anthroposophist he was, but not long after that, I became a Waldorf teacher. Mm-hmm. And I was a Waldorf teacher for 16 years.
You were a grades teacher?
I was a grades teacher. I was a class teacher, yeah. And I was also a master Waldorf teacher. I would go around the country teaching people how to be teachers, mm-hmm. and coaching people, mentoring people. So Steiner, and he's in my book, right? He is, in fact, I just gave a lecture about a month ago, I gave a lecture to the Anthroposophical Society here in Ann Arbor on Rudolf Steiner and Sophiology. Really? Because what Steiner is doing is Sophiology. Mm-hmm. In his Sophiology, though, it comes out of the Rosicrucian tradition. And I don't mean the Masonic Rosicrucian tradition. I mean going back to the original documents of the early 17th century, that when they appeared, like the Chemical Wedding and the Fama and the Confessio. And there, that they're also proposing the same thing. In fact, Thomas Vaughn, I mentioned, he wrote the first introduction to the Fama and the Confessio in 1650, I think it was 1650. So, and he was considered a Rosicrucian apologist. But that's spirituality, where the spiritual world is always present with the physical world, the material world. And also in the Rosicrucian documents, this desire to maintain or modify, or at least bring to mind the integration of science, art, and religion, which later with Goethe, that becomes a kind of a slogan for Goethe. When Goethe says, "If a man has science and art, he has religion. But if he has neither science nor art, give him religion." You know, and it's true, I think. And so that's a very much a Rosicrucian ethos, and Steiner carried that, and that has so much in of Sophiology is so much a part of that kind of Rosicrucianism. In fact, there's a Robert Flood, if you know about him.
Mm-hmm.
Another Rosicrucian. He was also he was kind of a theologian and a physician, which is interesting because so is Henry Vaughn, was also a physician, Paracelsian physician. But in one of his diagrams, he has, this famous one, the cosmos, and you have the Virgin Sophia is the kind of connection between the hand of God and creation, and that really informed my not just that image, but that kind of understanding of how reality is configured. Really had a huge impact on the way I started looking at the world and on my farm, and on musicians, and how I look at art, poetry, and because so to my mind, Sophia in that way is this what many people have called the metaxu,
Right.
the between.
Yes.
And then the Virgin Mary, for instance, becomes Sophia incarnate, and she does that metaxu in spades, because it was through her that divinity becomes palpable to the senses.
Yeah.
So that's heroic, but that's pure Sophiology.
So, I have a background in anthroposophy and such, and blah blah.
Yeah.
And the spirituality that you encounter in anthroposophy, at least my experience, has often been hyper intellectual.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, even when we're out in the soil or in the Waldorf kindergarten, there's a kind of, the theory is just so. And when you look at Marian spirituality, and certainly the Russians, we're really like, when Solovyev's talking integral spirituality, it's all heart. Yeah. And did this cause a tension for you, or did you have a hard time finding dialogue partners around this?
When I was hanging with the anthropops?
When you're hanging with the anthropops and you're a devout Catholic and you've got these literary interests, was that?
Yes and no. I mean, there were definitely people who thought it was. This is funny. Anthropops who thought it was weird to be instead of the other way around. And but my thing was, even back then, I just wanted to, I don't want to talk about things all the time, or just, come up with conceptual artifices, right? I wanted to actually do things and see if it worked or not, which is one of the things Steiner always says. He says, "Don't trust me,
right?
Find out for yourself," right? So I wanted to find out for myself, which is probably distanced me a bit from straight up anthroposophy. Even though I have a lot of friends who are anthropops, but when I left Waldorf teaching, I was kind of done for a while, because it's so easy to become the initiates, the secret group.
Oh yeah, it's the most insular thing in the world.
Absolutely. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
So this book was written long after you stopped teaching as a Waldorf teacher.
Well, was it long? Maybe we say I stopped teaching. I think I stopped teaching in 2007. So it was only 8 years later that the book came out.
And then we encounter, so you're pursuing this vein of study. You're a Catholic. The Russian inheritance is just really so rich. And the Catholic world seems to have been, at least from reading your book, infected by the pure nature doctrine to a greater or lesser degree, greater degree. And so you're probably, in your reading, are you looking for, beyond Marian spirituality or a folk spirituality, are you looking for theologians that can, from the Catholic tradition, that can...
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm looking for them, but I find them.
Yeah.
In the book, one of the people I talk about is Hans Urs von Balthasar. And so, I think, he is pretty sociological. He was deeply influenced by Bulgakov, the Russian sociologist. But, what happened with him is he was really good friends with Henri de Lubac,
right,
who wrote a book, Sur Naturel, right? Exactly on this topic. Well, you can say not really on sociology, but on pure nature. And de Lubac caught all kinds of hell for it, and he was prohibited from teaching for a while and prohibited from writing. The Pope was after him. I think it was
it was thought to be a kind of a crypto pantheism or something along those lines.
Well, yeah. And then, of course, another one of Balthasar's friends was Teilhard de Chardin, who was also accused of being a crypto pantheist or whatever it was. But both of those figures, Sur Naturel, which is surprising to me, if you've read it, it's hard. I don't think it's in English yet. I heard it's supposed to be coming out in English. I've been hearing this for 10 years. And I only could get a really beat up French copy that I had to return to the library when I read it. So I probably have a bunch of photocopied pages. But it's refreshing. In fact, who was also been really inspired by de Lubac is John Milbank from Radical Orthodoxy, and he wrote a book on de Lubac, and he's written some good things on sociology as well. And he wrote an endorsement for the Submerged Reality, which is how I got to know him better, because we had never met, and so he's supported me a lot, and he's one of the people out there in the world now, and he is an Anglican who is really representing a kind of sociology in mainstream theology.
Would he use that term?
Pardon me?
Would he use that term?
Oh, yeah. In fact, he's got a pretty, I wouldn't call it famous, but well documented and often documented essay called Sophiology and Theurgy.
Oh, really?
Which you can find, you can find a Word document online or a PDF of the whole thing. It ended up in a book published by, by Ashgate Publishing, and I wanted to put it in the anthology I did an anthology on sociology called The Heavenly Country, but they wanted so much money for me to include that, and I said, and never one of my publishers said, hey, wait, I'm on the team, right?
Yeah.
But they actually, right after that, they went under, so
no wonder they needed the money.
That's right.
Yeah, he's impressive because he's so well read. I was really pleased when I saw that Milbank had been reading, was well acquainted with Barfield and, a few other figures that really need their time. Well, I have to bring it to this. So when did you encounter meditations on the Tarot?
Around the time I encountered Sophia.
Really?
I think I was 20. Well, it was right around the time it came out, so I was about 23. It was maybe the year after it came out, and at the time I had floated away from the Catholic Church after some miserable experiences as a teenager in Catholic high school. And that book, that's certainly set me on the path back toward the church.
Were you versed in anthroposophy when you read that?
Yeah. Not really well versed, but I was getting there.
So reading that book for me, which was age 26, made me a Christian decidedly forever.
Yep.
And in a way, it was the most profound spiritual experience of my life.
Yeah.
And I was not ready for it.
I wasn't ready for it either.
Yeah, I mean, it really haunts me to this day. That is just, yeah, what can we say about it?
Yeah, you should see the copy. My original, it's a hardcover copy, the one by Amity House, and I colored all the cards with the appropriate colors. It's got so many notes and underlinings, and it's falling apart. But man,
Yeah, mine is
special thing.
Mine's all taped
and it's
up,
interesting.
coffee stains.
Interesting that you say that about the profound spiritual experience, because when I was working on my master's degree, my original plan was hoping to learn Russian. They didn't offer Russian at my university. I was hoping to learn Russian and do some more work on the Russian sociologist, but I really wanted to write my thesis on Tomberg and meditations on the tarot. It didn't end up working out that way for whatever reason. But through the course of that, I contacted, I don't know how I got in touch with these people, but I found phone numbers for Robert Powell, who translated it, and James Morganti, who translated the book. It's called Covenant of the Heart, or what's the other word? Lazarus Come Forth. I don't know how I got in touch with those guys now, so long ago, but I called them up, and Robert told me this. He had the same thing happen to him when he was studying eurythmy in Dornach in Switzerland, and he met this woman who had the manuscript of Meditations in the Tarot and said, "You are the person to translate this."
Oh, wow.
And it was as Robert said, it was not Catholic at the time. As he said, as he was going through that, he had profound religious experiences that he knew he had to join the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I literally lived, this has happened to me twice in my life, but I read that, and I think I lived in a state of some kind of grace for about 8 months. I couldn't get a resentment if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And the business about the heart being this emollient force in the world, that was happening.
Yeah.
And then when it ended, for me, it was a door slamming shut.
Wow.
And it had a lot to do with drug addiction and a few other things. But and then I would live in this sort of memory of that forever. Pretty profound. So it's good for me to hear that you had this experience and that Powell did. I mean, I've heard tell of people having that experience, but I know more people that read the book and don't have the experience.
Yeah, I know that happens too.
Yeah. And then, of course, when the Prokofiev stuff happens, well, I had to read all of it. And
did you really?
Yeah. And
I read some of it. I didn't read it all.
I met him twice, and I asked him, I talked to him about it.
Did you?
And he really acted as though it was a sacred errand that he had to do. And that experience, he writes about this, but that experience, he really insinuates that is a replication of the occult imprisonment that Tomberg himself experienced. That it's like spreading to the readers.
Yeah. I could never get down with that.
No, I couldn't.
That's the thing. That's the weird thing, right? Is that in Anthroposophy, it means Steiner was the one person who said, "Don't turn me into a guru. Don't make this dogma," right? And Prokofiev certainly did make a dogma, or tried to anyway.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff he raises about some of the French occultists in there might have some merit. They're not always the most savory characters. But yeah, and then that this would be this divisive thing. It's like this flashpoint between the world of Catholicism and the world of Anthroposophy. ever since is just stunning.
In fact, I remember when what's that one book by Prokofiev, The Case of Valentin Tarford?
Yes, that's the first one.
When that came out, I remember the Gnosis magazine.
Uh-huh.
They had a really funny review of it, and the title of the review was, "Uh-oh, those darn Jesuits are at it again."
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely had the Jesuit conspiratorial.
That's like, that it's that 19th century anti-Jesuit paranoia. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's still with us.
Oh,
I mean, if you go into the conspiracy world, you're still seeing these tropes of the Jesuits and the Masons having at it.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Too funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have time for that.
No. So, when I introduced this book and I said how important I think it is for Christians of a lot of stripes, is, it's a very dense book. And so I had to reread a big part of it to prepare for this. I read it the first time a couple years ago. And, you accomplish a lot in here. But I think for me as a reader anyway, the thing that was really, really, really amazing was that you gave a name to something. You basically said that there's this kind of liminal space that transcends theological thinking. And you say it brings together nature, the poetic, and contemplative practice. And for a few years now, I've been teaching this contemplative spiritual direction program at a place called the Alcyon Center in Maine.
Okay.
And the contemplative practice is really informed by Robert Sardello's heart stuff. But we're always reading scripture and poetry, and then we're taking those exercises and working with the scripture, but also working with nature. And you just named it. I mean, this is like, this could be the text for that.
Yeah. And I don't think I would have come to that understanding had it not been for Henry Vaughn.
And what was it about Vaughn that really did?
Because it's weird. If you read Vaughn, and if you read him, from our perspective, there's all this nature that goes on. He's really invested in God and nature. But if you look at it in the context of his times, nobody was writing about nature like that. Nature was not written about as something that is disclosing the divine, right? And with him, there's kind of I think there's like a braid. There's like the scripture braid, the human braid, the nature braid, and even the science braid. He was also a physician, right? Mm-hmm. So those things are all interpenetrated, kind of anticipates Goethe in a way. Mm-hmm. But he does it in such a beautiful way that when I was reading through all of his poetry, that's when I came to that realization. This is what I do. So that's what it is. Yeah, I got it. Now at that time, I think I was, the title of the chapter on the Vaughns in that one book is The Rosicrucian Mysticism of Henry and Thomas Vaughn. And that's what it is. And that's anticipates Steiner, anticipates Goethe. And I think this is still a science yet to come. I mean, there are some examples of that. I think David Bohm, you probably know about him, mm-hmm. right? In his implicate order.
Yeah.
Where in a lot of my philosophical background is in phenomenology. We do a lot of phenomenology. Steiner was a phenomenologist, right?
Yeah.
So in this idea of beholding something in reverence without judgment to actually see what lives there. That's what Vaughn was doing. Mm-hmm. That's what Goethe is doing. That's what Steiner was doing. Mm-hmm. And that's what our sciences don't seem to be doing. But David Bohm, in his implicate order, what happens in that is the observer becomes implicate and the observed, and vice versa. This kind of reciprocity that happens,
Right.
and that awakens wisdom.
Yeah. But I think you really nail it. This refraining from judgment.
Yeah.
There's some sort of internal gesture that has to happen with that.
Yeah.
A restraint or a consent.
Because judgment is a kind of attempt to possess, right?
Yes.
Or definitions.
Yeah. It's imperial kind of.
Yeah. Well, there's a class I teach on occasion for a Catholic college around here called, what's it called? Contemplation in Action. But I never give them a definition for what contemplation or action are. And so halfway through the course, I remember one time somebody came into the room, some official from the college. So this class is called Contemplation in Action. So what's contemplation? And they'll look at me like, I'm not telling you.
Yeah, right.
Figure it out.
Mm. Mm. But it would seem to me that spirituality, Christian spirituality, needs to learn these gestures anew. And we, I think reverence now has become so much about formal observances or rites.
Piety, yeah.
Yeah, piety. And there's something about, this is why Sardello really kind of changed everything for me, is there's something about, going into the body as a way of becoming resonant with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about him is he'll describe what he does as kind of an inverted anthroposophy.
Yeah.
And he'll refer you to like the last page of Outline of Esoteric Science, where Steiner's talking that this is a cognitive path. And then he says, but there's also a heart path.
Yeah.
And then, but he says it's too difficult for the modern world. And boy, the modern world needs it.
Absolutely. And I think Robert's done great things with that for the last 100 years.
Yeah,
in fact, I when I was a Waldorf teacher, it was my job to put together a conference one year, and I brought Robert and his wife Cheryl to be the keynote speakers for this conference. So I met him a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I re-encountered him in the last few years because I got to be friends with Therese Schroeder-Schieker. Do you know her?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And we get to be friends. She read the Submerged Reality and got a hold of me through my publisher.
Oh, wow.
And we've become really good friends. We talk once or twice a week. But I reconnected with Robert through her because she's very close to Robert.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked him. He wrote an endorsement for my edition of The Chemical Wedding.
Mm-hmm.
It came out about a year ago, right? Maybe 2 years ago, maybe. No, last year.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever. Yeah, but his work, he's I can't remember the name of the book, but he's got one of his books where he follows Tom Berg's model to speaking to the unknown friend.
Is that in Facing the World with Soul?
That might be.
I know he references the Tarot book in there. Yeah. And he references, I think, Florensky and maybe Bulgakov.
Well, yeah, I think what Therese and Robert are doing is a Sophiology.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course, he tries to move away from the names of things. He seems to be in this place where the names of things often cause more confusion.
I agree.
I do too, but I sometimes, I hope he doesn't watch this. I sometimes hope, want him to be a little more explicitly Christocentric. But that's, that's me.
It's definitely there.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Definitely there.
So in one of your interviews on your website I listened to, you said that you are a big fan of Simone Weil.
Yeah, very much.
And does she, I am as well, does she, I know the business about the attention and the beauty of the world. But where would you put her relative to Sophiology?
Well, in her radical attention, right? And that's one thing she says, that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, right? And her refusal to, in fact, not even a refusal to judge, but she even goes further, that where, and I think she has a lot to teach our current moment, right? Where rather than judging people, beneath her, she leaves her teaching job to go work on an assembly line, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She that's radical Christianity right there.
Yeah. And her statement that truth is available to everyone, no matter how limited or great your faculties.
Yeah, and in fact, the first, I edit this journal called Jesus the Imagination, and in the first volume, it's 4 years ago now, I translated one of her pieces where it's her only description of her spiritual experience of Christ. Well, I shouldn't say that it's not the only one, it's one of her spiritual experiences, where
the George Herbert experience, or
different than the George Herbert experience. It's where she's in an attic and she feels his presence. It's a really beautiful thing.
And that had not been translated into English before.
It had been, I think. Well, had it? I think it may have been, but I found the French, and I decided I would translate it myself, and I included it in that first edition. And but the George Herbert experience, and that's how. Well, with Simone Weil, I was really lucky as an undergraduate, because there are all these classes that I saw listed in the course catalog, but they never offered them. So I hunted down the head of the philosophy and religious studies department. I said, you got these courses, I'd love to take these, but they're never offered. And he said, well, you can just take them with me. So I did like an Oxford tutorial with him. In fact, he went to Oxford. And one of the things he had me read was Simone Weil. And I remember thinking, wow, this woman's serious. Her unflinching focus on the truth was just startling to me. And then what happened, so, I hadn't read Weil in a while, and when I was in graduate school working on my dissertation, I was working on that book I mentioned earlier, and I encountered, and my main focus in scholarship is the metaphysical poets.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was writing about George Herbert, and then, and I read her experience of Love 3, which is an extraordinary poem anyway, and how she told that priest in that letter that was while she was reciting that poem that Christ himself came down and took possession of her. And that's pretty startling, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens. And that's what I call an agapeic reading, right? Where you don't, where coming out of phenomenology, where you don't impose judgment on what it is, what the phenomenon is. And I think with her experience of that Herbert poem, is not only was she attentive and reverent toward the words of George Herbert, but that George Herbert's subject was able to shine through the poem and the translation and come into her heart, right?
Yeah.
Which, that's where she's alive in Sophiology, right there.
Right. The constant attention, the honing of the capacity of attention can only make one receptive. So absolutely. The geometry problem can be a spiritual exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I became acquainted with her the same summer I read the Tarot book when I was about 20.
It was an intense summer.
Oh yeah, it was. And so I've been journeying with her all these years, and for me, she's kind of like Quicksilver. If I stay away from her, I sort of lose it.
Yep.
And then I go back into it, and I find I have to go back to the gym all over again. Yeah. So she really demands something of you that few writers do.
Yeah, interesting. When I was teaching at, I can't remember what the course was, but I used Simone de Beauvoir in the course I taught on classical myth literature, her essay on the Iliad, the formal force, but other places too. But this one young woman who later became my research assistant when I was working on one of the books, I went to my office one day at the college, and there was this silk screen of Simone Weil from her passport photo. It was beautiful. And I thought, well, is this for me? So I better bring it in. I don't want to wreck it. So there was no note or anything. So I brought it into my office. And then a few weeks later, this young woman comes in. Did you get what I left for you? And it's beautiful. In fact, I've been meaning to get a frame for it. But it's a prized possession because it's an icon for me. Yeah. Yeah.
In the last few years, it looks like the secondary literature is finally beginning to, come along that can meet the challenge.
Yeah.
I do another interview on here with a woman named Lissa McCullough, who's a space scholar, and she just said it changed her life.
Mm-hmm.
She did it at the University of Chicago under David Tracy.
Wow.
Dissertation, and yeah, she just said it was utterly transformative.
Absolutely. So
what goes on at the Center for Sociological Studies?
Depends. So actually we're in the middle of, we're hoping to build a yurt out in our woods to offer classes in there. And right now I offer classes online, and we also have a biodynamic farm here. Where so there's a lot that goes on. Sometimes we do festivals.
You do? Wonderful.
In fact, when I left Waldorf teaching, I still had a few kids to go. I have 9 children, and I told my wife, I said, we're not going to leave Michaelmas and May Day to the Anthropops. It's not a boutique.
Right.
So actually we have usually, if we can get 3 homeschool Catholic families to show up, that's 27 kids right there. So we have these festivals. We just did one for Michaelmas a little while ago. We also do 12th night. We St. John's Day. So we try to keep those alive here at the center. But hopefully next year, after I get this yurt built, we'll start to have classes on site.
And the classes are?
Classes on Sophiology, I did actually have a lecture series on meditations on the tarot.
You do?
Mm-hmm. In fact, I think Therese was one that told me, you got to do that. You have to do that. And I have other things, and I haven't had a chance to get them together, but maybe this winter I'll be able to get one together on biodynamic farming and gardening as Christian path.
Yeah. Has anything like that been done?
I don't think so.
Wow.
And metaphysical poets, though, it's like kind of a limited clientele for that one, but it's what I do.
Do you have a meetup community in your area?
Interested in Sophiology and stuff?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I have friends, but I did notice, actually, this is kind of a funny thing. My daughter over the summer was working at a local farm for a little while, local organic farm, and she met this young man about her age. My daughter's 23, and he said to her, you ever hear of this Michael Martin guy? So I'm like, yeah. And then she's like, maybe you're not so crazy after all. But there is a Buddhist center nearby that gives classes and stuff like that. So that's why we wanted to get this yurt built. So because our barn is really drafty and noisy and full of animals. But if we can do it in a yurt, you know, we can have classes of, you know, 15 to 20 people, you know, through the course of a season, or if we could do it, we could even do like intensive weekends and stuff like that.
Do you have a digital community?
I have a digital community now. In fact, everybody's got a digital community now, right?
Yeah.
But in 2016, we had a conference here. I said, let's have a conference. And I was going to do it again this last year, but then we got hit with the pandemic. And it was great. In fact, quite a few people came, and I almost got Christopher Bamford to come.
Oh, wow.
And Therese was going to come, but she couldn't make it. But that was when I first met Therese. She contacted me about the conference. And so hoping maybe next year, see how things go with the lockdown situation. But I'd like to have another conference.
And how would you describe the demographic of the community? Is it tilted towards anthroposophists, or is it people from diverse backgrounds, or?
Diverse backgrounds. Well, I guess who gets attracted to my work, there's a few different demographics, I guess, but there's a kind of Christian anarchist, you know, people who are just feeling that there's something missing.
Yeah.
You know, and what is that thing that's missing?
Yeah.
So these, you know, the Christian anarchist types who are, I would describe more like Amish or Luddites, which, you know, which brings them into a relationship with anthroposophists, right? Who are also suspicious of the Ahrimanic structures of the internet and whatever, right? And our technologically overloaded lives. So there's some intersectionality there, I guess. But a lot of it, I see that are people who feel disenfranchised from institutional Christianity and anthroposophy. You know, they don't feel like they fit in any place.
Yeah. So are they disaffected from anthroposophy?
Some of them, I think, no, I don't think it's any.
Or they just never.
It's not true. It's not true. There, in fact, when the submerged reality came out, at first I was getting contacted by people actually in Robert Powell's group. Robert Powell, he lives, I think, in Ecuador now.
Oh, really?
But there's a group of people, and they're all basically Catholic anthroposophical Catholics. And some of them, quite a few of them were Waldorf teachers, and one wrote me, and she's saying how she thought the book was inspiring, and she said, and I could tell you were a Waldorf teacher. And I said, why? Because everything's explained so clearly. It's like you spent years trying to talk to an 11-year-old, right?
It is a clear book. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I said it's a clear book. It's a dense book, but there's clarity there. It's really quite a book.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, so, and I think people who, I've noticed recently there's a lot of, in fact, a lot of Episcopalians and Anglicans have taken my courses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see them show up at the Alcyon Center as well. Tilted pretty heavily towards that, actually, amongst the Christians. We get a few Quakers.
And they seem to be like high church Anglo-Catholic types.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
They're not, it's just more reverent. It's just, yeah.
What's beautiful, I mean, the liturgy is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think if there were, what do they call them? What's it called when the Anglican rite, what's it called? Whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But if one of those from ordinariate, if there were an ordinariate church around here, I'm sure that's where we'd be going to church.
Really?
Oh yeah. Well, because I spent so much time with those metaphysical poets, most of whom were Anglican priests.
Right.
And Robert Herrick, who was not really a metaphysical poet, but he's like my ideal drinking partner. he's so he's so full of life, and he's okay with things being messy, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to have it doesn't have to be ideologically secure.
Right.
We can be messy and still be a community, and I think he's
Right.
the ideal person for that.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I like about your book too, because you really show that, these folk practices in some ways are much closer to the Sophianic than Thomas More and the Cambridge Platonists.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is not something that really hadn't occurred to me until I read that.
Well, the thing is, I think people get attracted. I noticed this in the last 10 years or so. Young people feeling an attraction toward Catholic reverence, right, toward the traditional liturgy, but then they have to. It seems to be that usually they're young men that they feel obligated to become Thomists all of a sudden, or neo-Thomists, which is even worse, right? Which is disappointing, and I think it's actually a search for a father, for someone to lay down the rules, right?
Yeah.
And I think eventually they burn out on that, and they're trying to find, and that's the other side of it is, and I think they get attracted to my work because they're trying to find, like you said, those folk practices.
Mm-hmm.
It does not need to be an intellectual trip, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's conviviality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we do the festivals, because you should see the kids look forward to these festivals. For my two youngest are now they're going to turn 10 and 12 this month. But my eldest is 30. So but the little kids looking forward to this, and they all participate, and the community looks forward to these things because it's an embodied Christianity.
Yeah.
It's connected to the cosmos.
Yeah.
Right? It's connected to the cosmos. And if it's not connected to the cosmos, it's disincarnate.
Right. And my work, I work with drug addicts, and I am a drug addict. And, a lot of what we do is sort of what they call 12-step facilitation, which can be very powerful. It's got certain, I would call it like an evangelical pietism, really. But it does tend to be very Protestant. You're worshiping this book. There's a temptation to bibliodolatry. It can get very linear, very abstract. And you take that, and then you bring, and addiction itself. So you're running from this affect, this pain.
Right.
First, you go up into your head to try to manage it, which doesn't work. So then you go out into the drugs to escape. So it's a total disembodiment.
Yeah.
And I found that if you add something like Sardello's work, or even something like yoga, but really going to the Alcyon Center and getting in the woods with all that, they come down.
Yeah.
They feel they're out of the stress response. So I feel like this kind of message is applicable. It's a healing. It's more than a theology. It's a healing.
And I think that relationship with the land, that can be fostered in some way, whether it's the woods or farming and gardening or beekeeping, whatever it is, you really feel you're connected to something real.
Yeah.
Or woodworking, right? I mean,
well, it's really
like the Anthroposophy, when they do, teacher training where they have all that artistic work.
Yeah.
That is tremendously healing. And when I taught in Waldorf teacher training, that's the people would say, this is so healing. This has healed my soul. It's healed the wounds from my horrible education. Right?
Oh yeah, the first time I went to a Waldorf kindergarten, I felt like I had to grieve my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But anthropologists recognize now, and this is not really even up for debate, that in intact indigenous cultures, there is no addiction.
Right.
So where you have that kind of, Sardello calls it complex resonance with the earth, you don't have addiction.
No, because you're connected to the real.
Yeah. You don't feel alone. Alienation is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, and like you said, you know, because you're not alone, you're not thrust into your head trying to figure it out, right? You don't have to figure it out because you're already. And this another thing, I think it's in this Submerged Reality, but in my book, The Incarnation of the Poetic Word, that parosaic presence, being present, whether it's to a text or to nature or liturgy, if you're present to it, there's healing that comes with that because you're becoming present to what's real. You know, without your imposition of understanding or definitions or whatever it happens to be onto it.
Yeah.
I think that's what Robert gets into as well, right?
He does. He likes to say this. He says, the big obstacle to listening is the understanding, which is really wonderful. So we'll sometimes do these exercises where we'll get really silent, we'll get into the heart, and your dialogue partner will speak about something, you know, what's important to you, whatever. But you're watching for the hook, you know, for when Michael says something and I think, oh, that reminds me of my friend.
Yeah.
And what Robert says is if you can resist that hook, then something's going to open up. And it's true.
It's true.
I start really hearing you, which is more than
Yep.
classifying you.
And it's hard. I mean, our culture is so caught up in that headspace, right? It's in you know, we respond without listening.
Right.
Social media has really exacerbated that, right?
Have you had any inquiries about this book from seminaries or divinity schools or anything like that, to your knowledge?
I know at least one Orthodox seminary has been using it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really wonderful. That must feel good.
But I know, but I had no. Actually, I also heard. I don't know if they're teaching it or not, but I know they're carrying it at Mundelein Seminary in Indiana. I think they are. I know they were interested in what I was doing because one of their professors just wrote a book on, what's that guy's name? Can't remember his name. He wrote The Throne of Wisdom. What's his name? I quote him, but he'll come to me. But so they're interested in Sophiology, I guess. And believe it or not, the 17th, I'm giving a lecture at Hillsdale College.
Oh, really? Online?
No, in person.
Oh, well.
On Sophiology and the metaphysical poets.
Really?
And when they contacted me, they said, yeah, well, quite a few of our faculty members read your books.
Really? That's so interesting.
Yeah. So it's out there.
Yeah.
Milbank, in fact, Milbank has been using my work, and his wife as well. She's also a professor, and she's an Anglican priest.
And where does Milbank teach?
He retired from teaching, but his wife he teaches at, and he used to teach at Nottingham University.
Well, he's definitely, you know, if you want somebody to popularize your work, he's a great guy, at least in those circles.
Yeah, so I'm not. In fact, recently, what happened? So I think, I don't know for sure, but I think I've made it okay for academics to talk about Rudolf Steiner too.
That's no small feat.
That's no, well, but
so long you don't mention Vulcan and two Christ children.
Yeah. But because recently, I don't know, it was a year ago maybe, somebody was giving a lecture on Rudolf Steiner at some conference or something. Somebody let me know about it. I told my wife, she said, they're stealing your thunder.
Yeah. It's
Well,
good.
glad, you know, I mean, okay to talk about. I mean, people, I don't think they know how to understand them. And let's face it, you first dip into Rudolf Steiner, you're in a different world,
Oh yeah.
right? So for the typical academic, that's taboo material.
Mhm.
But look, you know, I think the other thing is with all of the practical successes of Rudolf Steiner's uh, inspirations, whether it's in farming, viticulture, or beekeeping, people are taking a little bit more seriously now.
They are.
Yeah.
There's the first book, theological book on Barfield just got put out
Nice.
by a guy in England. So I'm hoping that that'll be. I've often wondered why Emil Bach isn't more read by academics, because he would be more.
Yeah, he seems a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Martin, this has been a real pleasure.
Hey,
I hope you get some readers out of this. And I would like to support your work any way I can.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So hopefully we'll talk again.
Okay, great. Thanks, Piers.